Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Steinhardt. I'm the technology editor here at Viacom CBS Digital, and we're very proud to present Exploring Ransomware, Root Causes and Trends. This is a live and interactive webcast sponsored by KPMG and BlackBerry, and we're going to be talking about how ransomware gets into an organization, how it propagates, and what you may be able to do about it. In order to address this very timely and important topic, I'm very happy to introduce James Arnold, also known as Jim, who's a principal at KPMG Cybersecurity, and Steve Struthers, who's Vice President of Global Solutions and Alliances at BlackBerry. Before I turn the mic over to Jim, I just want to remind everybody that the presentation is interactive. So if you have any questions, you can hit the Ask a Question button on your console, and we will try to address as many of those questions as we can live during about 10 minutes that we've set aside at the end of the presentation. If we don't get a chance to respond live, or if you happen to be watching this on demand, you can still use that button, send in your questions, and we will respond via email. And if you'd like to learn more about our sponsors, or you'd like to download a copy of today's slides, you can find all of that under Related Resources, also in your console. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over to Jim.
Michael, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Steve and I are very excited about presenting this topic. As you can imagine, since the lockdown, the bad actors have been taking extreme advantage of our clients around the more remote workers and the vulnerabilities that have been exposed in the environment. And we see a significant growth in ransomware. The FBI recently issued a report stating that cybercrime was up 300%. And being a cyber response professional, I can tell you I 100% agree with their evaluation. We've never been busier. And we look forward to sharing some information with you all that can hopefully help prevent you from becoming a victim of a ransomware incident. So we're going to start with here just talking about what we're going to talk about today, and that is what we're seeing and what are some of the ransomware trends that we see out there. We're going to talk about the trends. We're going to go through a couple of anonymized cases, and we're going to talk about what we are, what the compromising or what companies are missing. What are the practices that should be followed to help eliminate some of the vulnerabilities due to the ransomware. What we're finding from a ransomware trends perspective is that the bad actors are looking to live off the land, right? They find an entry point and then they exploit those gaps. And when we say live off the land, they're laterally moving through the environment. They're using PowerShell and other softwares to leverage their way. We've also found that we investigate more of these incidents. Some of the bad actors are actually renting their space to others. You'll be negotiating, you'll be in the middle of a negotiation, and you'll find out that the person you're dealing with really doesn't have control over the environment. They're a middleman, and sometimes the negotiations don't go well. They have to go get approval and get the acceptance they need. Also, when we're talking about living off the land, we're seeing the hackers become more resourceful, and they're not launching a lot of malware into the environment that makes a lot of noise and can be identified and stopped by antivirus and other tools. They're working very hard, and there's different ways we'll talk about it later, some of the control gaps. But once they gain access to the environment, they're using the company's own tools to move around and gain access to different areas in the environment, which makes it very difficult to find them, right? It's not like they're doing things out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, they have gained admin control and other ways to move around the environment, so they're not being exposed or found out very easily. As you can see on this slide, too, we talk about 74% of organizations feel they are vulnerable to cyber attacks. And that was from a 2019 survey. I'm happy to say that the 22nd annual Harvey Nash KPMG Seattle survey will be issued next week. And if anyone's interested in that, you can send in a question on the chat, and we'll be happy to send you to that a copy of that survey and also invite you to a webinar that we're planning to have on September 29th discussing current trends around the CIO survey environment. So I'd like to talk about a recent case study, or actually go back one slide here and talk about the layered extortion. That's where we're seeing, there used to be more honor among thieves, I'd like to say, in that when you paid the ransom, you typically got the decryption keys and you were able to, begin decrypting and recovering your information. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more layered extortion where the ransom is paid and you're only given a partial amount of the decryption keys that you need and then told that, hey, we proved that those work. Now you have to pay us more money to get the rest. Seems a little unfair, but they're the bad guys. They're doing what they need to do. Or they're actually pushing further and saying, hey, now that we've proven that we had the data, you got your data back, we want additional money now, further ransom or extortion to prevent us from disclosing to the world that we actually had your data or had access to your data. So it's just becoming, more important that we really pay attention and do some of the procedures we're going to talk about later to try to prevent the ransomware matter from happening. Also, recently in the news, you may have heard about the U.S. sanctioning Evil Corp. And it's been a lot of discussion in the last month or so. Garmin was one of the companies, and it was suspected that Evil Corp was responsible for the Garmin hack. And by the U.S. government putting sanctions in place against Evil Corp, it prevents, it could be a violation of U.S. law for any company or insurer or any agent to pay the ransom to those individuals or companies that are on the OFAC list. So we need to really think about that and determine how we're going to move forward, and it'll be interesting to see the results and if any individuals or companies actually are fined for doing those types of things. We're also seeing many of the hackers are doing a better job of covering their tracks. When I say that, I mean they're removing any evidence of the ransomware binaries after they've launched and encrypted the data. Typically, we were able to go in and find those binaries, which allowed us to do reverse engineering and determine, what the malware was actually doing. Was it just decrypting, or was it also extracting data, or was it doing other things? Was it launching other malwares throughout the environment? That was very helpful information for us during an investigation, because then, while we could say, within reason or possible reason that no data was exfiltrated, which is very important when it comes to companies who have reporting requirements, whether it's health information or PCI or PII or other data. That is one of the more costly aspects of a data exfiltration from a ransomware matter, is the notification process and the possible litigation, class action lawsuits, and those things. So the ability for us to actually reverse engineer the malware and make that determination was helpful. But the bad actors are getting a little more, shall we say, I don't know if they're lazy. They don't want to have to keep redoing their malware, but they don't want us to know how it works. They don't want us to know how it's functioning, and that they immediately remove it. So it's making our investigation process that much more difficult. So I want to talk to you a little bit about one case study we had. It was a large healthcare organization, over 10,000 endpoints, Ryuk ransomware, had 10 different locations. There were identified email accounts that had been targeted by email-based malware, but their security solution had been blocking all of these. So it was really difficult for us to figure out how the bad actor got in. But we had identified some successful RDP sessions from a known bad IP address on the guest wireless system. So the initial hypothesis was that a bad actor had actually come on site to one of their locations. This was a hypothesis from the client, by the way, and that somebody had logged into the system and launched the malware that way. we really were not convinced that was how the bad actors had entered the environment. So we kept digging and we kept digging, and we really did determine that the client had a pretty secure environment, and their tools were successfully blocking the email malware attempts and phishing attempts and other things. But what we did find out, that the company had a strict policy that they did not allow personal access, personal email access from company devices. So we kept digging and found that a local IT admin didn't appreciate the company wasn't allowing him to access his personal email. Had set up a laptop on the desk network. It disabled many of the corporate security functions, which allowed him to access his email, but it also allowed the bad actors access to the environment. And that's how they got in. And, needless to say, this individual is no longer working at the company. But this really shows the importance of your overall cybersecurity being as only good as, the weakest link, and why ongoing employee education is vitally important. You would think someone in an admin function like this would have realized what was going on, but he really wasn't a security professional. He was an IT domain admin person. I just thought it was that important for him to read his emails. So that allowed this malware to be injected in the environment, cost significant amounts of money to the client. I mean, the CIO was sleeping on a cot in his office. This incident took months to recover. We'll talk about it a little more later about backup systems. And this client did have a pretty robust backup system, but it was determined it was going to take 4.5 months to recover from backups, which obviously wasn't acceptable. And it was also affecting their entire organization. I mean, their air conditioning systems didn't work, their payroll systems didn't work, their patient systems were affected. So this was pretty much a life-threatening situation with being a healthcare organization like it was. So it was very important for this client. Unfortunately, had to pay the ransom, and then we worked with them very diligently to decrypt the 10,000 endpoints. Fortunately, we were able to develop some scripting and make the decryption go much faster. We didn't have to go to each individual endpoint, or we'd still be there. And it was also, something to think about when you're doing a matter like this type of ransomware investigation. There's really 3 continuous or simultaneous steps you'll be performing. One is the investigation to determine what happened, because it's important to understand what happened so you can prevent it from happening again. But the other is really securing the environment, because you don't want to start rebuilding or doing anything within the environment until you're sure it's secure and the malware is no longer there. And then the third and most important from a business perspective is remediation. All of those 3 steps have to occur simultaneously. And like I said, it's very important to ensure the environment is secure before you start going down the path of remediation and then the investigation portion. We find too often that our clients, or many times our clients, figure that they have backups, they don't need to investigate, they just start launching, then you find out the malware was already in the backup, or the malware or the open doors were still there, and then the bad guys get right back in. So it's important, like I said, to make sure the environment is secure before you move on to those other steps. We're going to talk about a second case study here. This was a global manufacturing organization. This only had 300 hosts infected. It was a quicker investigation for us. But it's important to discuss the manufacturing sector a little bit. They're one of the least protected, I would say, of all the industries. And that really has to do with the manufacturing process. It's not that our clients aren't diligent, but the manufacturing process that's been in place for many, many years and has many, many steps. We find old Windows XP systems. We find 2003 servers and things like that. We find a lot of admin passwords across the entire manufacturing environment. We find some flat networks there also. And the issue is for our clients, they to upgrade, the Windows 2003 server that is step number 17 in the manufacturing process may affect the entire process and throw off production, and they're always reluctant to take on that issue or that update. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen, and we see more and more of our clients realizing that, especially after they suffer a malware incident. About a year and a half ago, I worked on an acquisition for one of our clients of a manufacturing entity, and they made soap, and we pointed out a number of issues for them, very similar to what I'm talking about here with their passwords and the flat network and some of the unpatched devices. And the response was, yeah, we understand, but we make soap. Who cares? It's not like we have PHI, PII, PCI, or whatever. And less than 2 months later, they were hit with ransomware, and basically their 11 locations were out of business for about 3 weeks. So a couple $100,000 investment in improving the environment would have saved them millions of dollars in lost revenue and failure to meet contracts that they needed to meet. So in this particular situation, for this one, like I said, it was a little easier for us to find, but I've already talked about it. Basically it was the older systems and the interdependency throughout the process, and it allowed the bad actors to get in and then really propagate their way throughout the network and throughout the environment, and just shows again that the importance of not sharing passwords and accounts and passwords around in the organization, and also developing workarounds for, we understand you can't get rid of that 2003 server in the middle of a manufacturing process, but there are things you can do and mitigations you can place to better secure that device itself. So, we're not saying crash your entire manufacturing process, but figure ways and build in patches and other things to better secure those weaknesses within the environment. And the only way to really figure out what those weaknesses are is actually to perform a cyber maturity assessment and compromise assessment of your manufacturing process. And that's an easy step to do. It requires probably bringing in an outside vendor to look at that, and then developing a roadmap and starting acting on that roadmap. One of the things we try to explain to our clients is, you can spend every penny of profit on cybersecurity. That doesn't mean the bad guys won't still get in, and that's not what we're suggesting you should do. But what we're suggesting you should do is build that cybersecurity roadmap. You need to know where you are and where you're trying to get to, and then as you have the budget and you have the money, you can start working your way down that road in the direction you need to go to improve your overall cybersecurity. We like to describe it as, if a bad guy's walking down the street and there's a house with the doors and the windows wide open, one with the doors and the windows locked, and one with the doors and the windows locked, and an advanced, alarm system, where's the bad guy going to go? The bad guy's going to go to that house with the doors and windows open. And what you just need to do as an organization is develop that roadmap and begin closing, each of those doors and windows as you can. And, you don't have to do them all at one time. So based on, where we've gotten to so far, these two case studies kind of show you some of the, highlighted some of the control gaps we've seen across all of our investigations. And I'm going to go spend some time here going through the next few pages and the different control gaps we see and talk about those a little bit. The first one, and probably the easiest, well, I don't know if the easiest, most important thing to do is ensure you have proper backups for your environment. We actually assisted a client about a month ago. It was a smaller a company, but they had just completed a full backup literally at midnight, and the ransomware was launched at 6 a.m. the next day. Well, that was an easy one to recover from, right? We were able to work with the client. They pulled their backups, and we didn't pay the ransom. We did the investigation, secured the environment, and immediately remediated. And probably 2.5, 3 days after the incident, they were fully back up and functional. So that's great, if you have that. But what we find more and more because our clients, if they do have backups, many of them are stored in the same environment as the live systems. So the bad actors know this, so they go in and ensure they encrypt the backups also. We also find our clients who do not have not tested or looked at their backup system regularly, so they think they have a good backup system, then they go find out, oh, yeah, those systems we added in the last 6 months or over the last year, they're not really part of the backup, so they're vital to our function, and we don't have proper backups, which then requires them to go and pay the ransom. So some form of offline backup is just critical, and if you have a proper offline backup that you regularly test, you should fear ransomware less. As long as those backups are, periodic and timely, you shouldn't have difficulty recovering from them. Now, I did mention, you have to think about the ability to back up and how long it would take. And the large healthcare organization I mentioned before, they had pretty good backups, but it was going to take them, 4 to 4.5 months to recover from backup. So again, that wasn't acceptable. The next thing on the list here is multi-factor authentication. And again, that's not a real expensive thing to put in place. It might be a little bit of a hassle for your employees and your executives to do, but just by implementation of multi-factor authentication, organizations are able to eliminate a significant number of phishing schemes and other ways that bad actors are able to access the environment. The next one here, talking about failure to apply concept of least privilege. And that's just talking about, in English, making sure that what people have access to, they actually need to have access to. Domain admins accessing, every system, that's great, but, do they need access to every system? They should only have the access to the systems they need. They should also, be spread across different routine, user and high risk activities to make sure that one password cannot get across the entire organization. We've also come across, just individual users that have admin privileges that allows access to the entire system. And then this is one we see way too many times. The same password used across, a 2,000, server network, which is the same password. And unfortunately, some of those passwords are still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and things like that. So just some normal hygiene around ensuring proper access and ensuring proper password rules are put in place will go a long way to ensure your system. Here's another one we see pretty often, and again, the one we talked about with the IT guy coming in from the outside. If the client had properly enforced their third-party access and things, it could have prevented that. We also have noticed a number of times, and this happens with KPMG ourselves, when we go to work for one of our clients, there's a very lengthy process to onboard us as a contractor, issue us a company laptop, and allow us to do our work. And whether it's not necessarily cyber response work, but whatever the work is, internal audit or other things. But then those contractor devices aren't tracked as thoroughly as employee devices. So when we don't log them in properly and get the patches updated and things of that nature, they may not be caught. So what we really need to do is ensure that your third parties and contractors are subject to the same controls. When they no longer are working on the project, make sure those laptops are turned in. When patching is required, make sure those third-party vendors and things are required and they get up to speed and remain on the network. This one, happens pretty often, and the next one about employees' ability to open macro-enabled documents when they receive an email. It's not that hard or difficult to put in place security steps to prevent that from happening. And that's how the phishing emails are successful, right? The employees click on the link, and it launches the malware throughout the environment. What we need to do is really look at the ability to do that We have a number of clients. I can't send a PDF document. I can't do other things. We have to set up SFTP sites if we want to exchange data. And depending on the type of organization, that may not be cumbersome, security feature to put in place. So you should think about that. Here's the next one, and the next one's talking about logs and visibility and log retention and those things. So when we're doing an investigation, in order for us to figure out what happened, is really we need some log data. We need to go back and figure out how the bad guys got in, how they started moving laterally through the environment. But we find more and more that our clients do not have proper logging in place. Many of our smaller clients do not have any logging at all, or they have poor visibility, into their environment. We also see that even some of our larger organizations don't maintain the log data for long enough. Maybe it goes back 2 weeks, maybe it goes back a month. We need to develop more thorough process that allows for more in-depth logging that can be reviewed for a while. The next sub-bullet here just talks about poor inventory records and assets. I don't think I've worked on any investigation where our clients knew every asset that was on their systems and in their environment. But a device here or there is a problem. But when you don't know 20% of the devices in your environment, that's a big problem. So as an organization, you really need to understand what's in your environment, get controls in place to ensure that devices just aren't plugged in, at a business unit or whatever. But you really need to understand that, track that. That's very critical when it comes to this investigation phase, because you need to understand how they got in. But then from securing the environment phase too, you need to ensure that endpoint security is launched, and Steve's going to talk a little bit about that later. On every investigation we work on, we launched a silence tool, which will immediately begin to identify malware and prevent the malware from continuing to propagate throughout the environment. The other thing we talked about here is just the centralized visibility of logs, right? If some of our clients do have log data, it's not centralized or properly reviewed. I can tell you on many occasions we go in and we do find logs that say, look, 27 days ago the bad guy launched Emotet and TrickBot in the environment. But nobody was reviewing that. So 27 days later they get hit with ransomware. So if somebody would have been assigned that task, that the log data was properly centralized and reviewed, it could have easily squashed that before the bad guys came back to launch the ransomware. So having a similar process would be very helpful. Moving on, failure to routinely audit accounts and privileges. So we've kind of touched on this already. Terminate employees, contractors, and others who still have active accounts. That should be a regular process, whether it's monthly, biweekly, quarterly, whatever. It needs to be done. It should be done, as part of the employee termination checklist to make sure that they're off the environment. Other things we see, and it's amazing that this still is occurring, but our clients who have their environments completely exposed to the internet. No firewalls, no stop gaps or anything like that. Sometimes that occurs because they have third-party vendors who need access to the environment to help do repairs and other things. We just got to figure that out. I mean, we've had more than one occasion in the last 2 years where in the last year, where the environment, where the bad guys got in through the third-party vendor who was, servicing the printers. And this third-party vendor used the same password to access the printers at every client that they have. That just can't be acceptable. So as an organization, you need to work with your third-party vendors to insist that they increase their level of security around that. We've talked about, passwords already, but, just the 1, 2, 3, 4, they're still out there. Our password 1, 2, 3. I mean, you've all heard this 1,000 times, but people still do it. You need to really increase the length and complexity of your passwords. And, there's been some discussion about it. If I'm an organization that does good monitoring and I require, a 12-character lengthy password with multiple characters and things, Do I need to, change those every 60 or 90 days? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you should update those passwords on a regular basis every day as you can. Again, Steve will talk about this a little more, but just failure to leverage host-based EDR tools or antivirus tools to help detect and prevent. So, the antivirus tools are basically looking for known viruses and known infections, where the more AV-based and AI-based tools are looking for anomalies in the environment. And again, I don't want to steal Steve's thunder. He'll talk about that more, but it's very important to have both levels of protection that will prevent unknown executables from launching. Right? So if you have a proper EDR tool in place, if a bad actor does gain access to one endpoint device and he attempts to launch the malware throughout the environment, the tool should catch that and say, wait a minute, this isn't a known executable, and just quarantine it. And if it is, a new development tool or whatever, then your IT group can see that and whitelist it and allow it to occur. But, by preventing it from launching through the environment, you're preventing the malware from launching to begin with. We've kind of touched on this already, no SOC or no MSSP following up on the security alerts. Again, that's the biggest issue, especially for, smaller and medium-sized businesses that, they may even have the tool, but they don't know how to use it, or they don't follow up on the alerts. But again, you should have tools in place, and if you have them in place, you make sure you're following up on those alerts. It sounds like a lot of work, but once you properly tune your AV tools, it's going to filter out 99.9% of the problems, and you're only going to be looking at 0.1%, and then 1/100th of that is going to be actual malware that you really have to worry about. Kind of talked about the flat networks already with little segmentation. We've worked on a project in the last 6 months of a company that was growing very rapidly. They had a very flat network. They were also in the healthcare space, but every little organization that they brought in, they just plugged in the network, didn't do any review, didn't do anything. And again, they found a 2003 server that the bad guys got into and just worked their way right in. We kind of talked about unsupported, unpatched systems again, but you got to do the security patching. It's not like these bad guys are sitting there and coming up with brand new ideas every day. I would say 90-something% of every ransomware or malware investigation that I've worked on at KPMG has been from a known security weakness that hasn't been properly patched. And we're not talking about something that came out last week. I'm talking about things that people have known for 5 years or 10 years, right? We recently worked on a malware matter for a web hosting company, and it was a known weakness in their software that had been known for 10 years, but they didn't properly patch it, and all of the customers that they had on their web hosting platform fell victim to a malware incident. All right, another one, we find this very often, and this is something to think about. When these incidents occur, so when that 1/100th of a problem occurs, and your IT group thinks, oh yeah, I fixed that, and then we find out later they didn't fix it. So not to try to toot my own horn or forensic vendors' horns, but our job is to investigate malware and incidents. IT function's job is to keep systems running. Sometimes they're not aware. They walk over the evidence. They do things. They see the bright, shiny object that the bad guys put in place for them, and they think they got it when they were really coming around the other side. So that's where you really need to ensure that if you see something, make sure it's properly remediated. And then again, along the same lines, rarely are the assumptions tested, right? When the bad guy or when the IT groups think they corrected the weakness or other issue, we come to find out they really didn't. They didn't do any additional vulnerability or penetration testing to ensure that they were properly fixing the problem. So Steve, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. that was great. I'll start out by, again, I'm Steve Struthers with BlackBerry. I run our Global Solutions Group. And I'll start out by repeating backup 3 times and leave it at that. Jim already mentioned it. Probably the #1 thing that I find that could help our clients when we get into a tough situation. And then, just taking that and going down to a little more details around things like user permissions. So network shares is a big one as well that we see. If users don't need to write files to a file share, for example, take the time to enable just read access for that group of users. I can't tell you how many times files that we worked on a share that were encrypted, only to find out that the only thing that really needed access to the files was the application, not the users themselves. And that by giving read-write access, it really caused challenges, that would have never happened if the customers had done this right the first time. Another thing would be, Jim mentioned, the shadow copy service, so volume shadow copies. It's called BSS by Microsoft. One really common thing is making sure that on everybody's local machine that can only be accessed by an administrator account, which basically means don't make your users local admins if you can avoid that. I know sometimes that's easier because it allows users to do things and not complain to the help desk, but it definitely causes many problems that in the ransomware incident. So if you're able to do that, then ransomware generally wouldn't have access to the VSS, and you'd be able to restore that system with the admin password. A connection to that, Jim mentioned not having local admin password be the same across the enterprise. That's really hard to do when you have thousands and thousands of systems. So again, recommend using a tool for that, something like the Microsoft local admin password solution, call it LAPS, which would allow you to manage that centrally and cycle those passwords from time to time. Or something like a CyberArk, which would give you that same type of capability. The one caution I'd throw out that we run into in those situations is make sure you have an offline server for whether it's CyberArk or some other solution that you can use to get local administrator passwords when you need them. We did have one client that had everything integrated and malware was infecting their system, ransomware, very rapidly, so they had disconnected everything from the domain. And unfortunately, once they did that, they could no longer retrieve the local admin passwords to be able to get on to the individual machines to remediate them. So they ended up in a catch-22. So sort of think about those things and how you're going to operate when you don't have access to the network and the domain, how you're going to operate offline to remediate systems. Simple things like changing any passwords anytime a phishing campaign is successful. So from time to time, somebody is going to click on something. You may go and you may check and find out that some other control that you had in place stopped the malware from executing, but it's still really important to go back and change passwords on that user that was impacted. And I think if you do some of these things, these are some of the most common things that we find in our engagements. The next thing that I would think about for sure is some of the common methods that we've seen with this. We've had users that have basically been able to block ransomware in their environment literally just by implementing good email security and basic user awareness. So, always, I'd say the top 2 things we run into are that users really do need to be trained on safe web browsing practices. So just common attack types, phishing emails, making sure that your users really know not to click on these. And it sounds simple, but it's still the #1 thing that we run into. A lot of these will be tied to events. So you might have a public-facing event for your company. It could be a sales kickoff. It could be a user conference. And immediately emails will come in referencing, click here for updates on the user conference. using your own graphics and your own information. So just making sure users literally don't click on anything unless they 100% know where it's from. Also, browser settings is another big one. So setting your browser settings not to allow automatic execution of scripts is one that I like to recommend to everybody, because generally scripts should be disabled on end users' machines, or at least there should be a user acknowledgement and then proper training on that. So if something tries to run a JavaScript or a VB script, the user should have to acknowledge that. And that's something that's easy to configure as well. Jumping to the next slide here. And then, simply, how can you be prepared, right? So I see so many companies that when we come in for an incident response, they've done a lot of those basics. Maybe patch management wasn't where it needed to be, like Jim said, or maybe backups weren't there. But there were some further steps that were never done. So what happens when you actually are in a breach situation? Do you know in your IR policy, do you know where the nearest Bitcoin ATM is, for example, if you need it? Do you have access to that? Do you have a ransom payment decision tree, right? Who needs to make the call in the company? Does it have to go to the CFO? Does it have to go to the CEO? What's the process when ransomware hits? And is there a dollar value? Is there, some sort of a workflow? Documenting all those things ahead of time makes it much, much less stressful when an incident hits and happens. And it should all be part of the business continuity plan, right? Not only supporting investments in, solid backups and more talent, but also in having things on hand like Bitcoins and processes for responding to ransomware. When we built the machine learning endpoint back at Cylance prior to BlackBerry, the one overriding thing that we had in mind was being able, like Jim said, to prevent attacks, prevent execution, because one of the things that we found almost in all cases was, even though some of the largest companies out there in the world invested, millions of dollars in controls, there was always a spot somewhere where somebody, missed something. And, I look at it in terms of, I remember one quote when we went in with the endpoint Cylance Protect on the machine learning endpoint and talked to the client, and they said, hey, we've spent the last 48 to 72 hours chasing our tails around as this threat actor has been moving through our systems, pretty much moving at will, encrypting hard drives, and bringing operations to a halt. Once they were able to get a tool down that basically stopped zero-day malware and was able to use machine learning, it let the humans focus on the things they needed to, right, which was shoring up their perimeter defense, stopping the attackers from being able to access, finding, source and destination IP addresses to block things. So I would just, to kind of close up on my part, really tell you to, truly think about the risk that technology poses to your business across the board. Not for the sake of technology, but for the sake of the business that gets done every day. Because each time your business automates a process, leveraging software, it creates a new risk in the availability of that system. If that system becomes critical for you to do something like process orders or deliver services in the field, every single system that comes in to automate something needs to be tested. And that leads to testing your incident response plans, like Jim said. I highly recommend mock exercises and red team exercises so that you know exactly what you're going to do when an incident does occur. And also to think super strategically about legal and insurance and those issues that are non-technical, so that you are covered for business interruption and that you have the retainers in place you need when you're ready to go. So Jim, those are my thoughts on things that we see, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Steve. And that was a good point you brought up about the tabletop exercise. I'm not really, and I didn't touch on that much, but actually, doing a fire drill and seeing how things work and testing your incident response plan and playbooks is very important aspect of overall cybersecurity. So from my next slide here, really not talking specifically about ransomware, but it's just talking about how incident response itself is evolving, right? As Steve mentioned, we'd rather not have incident response and prevent things before they happen, but just the overall, automation of security monitoring, a lot of things are moving to the cloud. We need to be able to really work with our clients to ensure, their cloud environments are secure. It's another area we see a lot. Actually, another matter I recently worked on, the client's immediate solution was, let's just move everything to the cloud. You really got to strategically look at implementing all the security opportunities or tools around the cloud, and then go from there before you do that. From a perspective of us being able to investigate, from a forensic perspective, we need to be able to move quickly, and we're developing, forensic labs within the cloud and the ability to do our investigation right there without having to download a lot of data and other things. Same thing, we're talking about here just from the native resources and the ability to work directly with the cloud, and then doing, we talked about incident simulations, so the security monitoring and training teams to understand what's occurring in the cloud, and also just overall what's occurring in the environment. So with that, we're moving on to the questions, and I see we've got a few questions that came in, and Steve, maybe you and I can start addressing some of these. So how about, you want to take this first one? It says, I'm told and believe our cybersecurity is sufficient. What specific questions should I be asking of our IT team or our cybersecurity team, to test or confirm the sufficiency?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. I think the one thing that I would always tell people is to recognize that even the best cybersecurity team in the world gets breached, and the approach should always be taken as a team effort and as a positive, that we're all here to protect the business. And so the kinds of questions I'd be asking is, are we doing any type of mock attack activities on what we would do in the event of an attack? Do we have an incident response plan? Do we have a retainer that we can call on quickly? Have we used any type of a control matrix? Like Jim showed a lot of controls there, but there's standard controls out there, like the CIS top 10, there's obviously NIST, and just making sure that I think a good diligence is being applied to information security. And if you feel like it's sort of an afterthought, which sometimes it is in an organization that's focused on uptime and generating orders and processing the business, a little bit of outside help wouldn't hurt to come in and collaborate with your team to get better and be more prepared.
Thanks, Steve. We have another question that says, can you speak to the difference between ransomware and the latest Russian Droblov cybersecurity malware reported by the NSA? And I can take that a little bit. And it's this new malware really isn't. It isn't ransomware. It's a lot quieter than that. They're basically trying to get into the environment and do more reconnaissance and searching and referencing and trying to ultimately, I believe, exfiltrate data. It's really it's a Linux kernel. It's a rootkit, and it has a remote access RAT. And really, again, its goal is to continue that remote access, not encrypting your files for ransom. Their goal is to be stealth and really not create noise. And eventually, maybe they'll launch ransomware or other things, but we're just still trying to figure out the whole purpose of what they're trying to do from that perspective. Next question we have is, Steve, I'll turn this one to you. Is there one global inclusive tool software that monitors all the variety of old and new ransomware?
Wow, that's a good one. I would say that there's certainly not a de facto standard. There are great sources of information for that, like, the Center for Internet Security, CIS, Google that. I look at all the sources the common ones that people would look for out there. So, I think if you search, you're going to find, the top 10 latest piece of ransomware. Virus Total, which is now owned by Google, is a great source. And then tools that leverage machine learning, like our tool, as well as some others out there in the market. We're sort of looking at it a different way. We're looking for the what we call the unknown unknowns. So a lot of people don't realize this, but with most machine learning tools, when we stop a piece of malware, we don't actually stop it because we know what it is. We stop it because we've seen something like it before, and we've decided that it's going to take an action that based on that corpus of data, it's going to do something that's not allowed. So, you got to kind of pull all this together. You're not going to be able to find one source for all the malware.
Right. I'll add to what you just said. You also stop it because you don't know what it is, right? So if it was already a whitelist executable or a file that it would go through, but here's a new file,
correct,
and your tool can stop that from launching in the first place. The next question is, given all the potential control gaps, how should our organization begin addressing cybersecurity? I'll take that one, and I think we've kind of hit on it here, right? There's that you got to start somewhere, right? So developing a compromise or performing a cyber maturity assessment to understand where you are, whether that's based on ISO or NIST or some other group that you want to follow. You start that cyber maturity assessment and start identifying where you may have some control gaps. And then, as I said, you've got that roadmap to begin following down that roadmap and figuring out those weaknesses and areas that you want to improve on. Next question. Which group takes overall ultimate control of ransomware, IT versus cybersecurity? Steve, I'd assume there he's talking about the question's really relating when you have a ransomware incident, who's in control. And I guess if you're answering that, and not I guess, if you're asking that question once the ransomware is launched, it's way too late, right? So that goes back to developing your incident response plan. You should identify your forensic vendors and outside breach counsel and other things before that occurs. Steve even mentioned cyber insurance and things like that. So when you have a ransomware incident, you should already know who's in control, and then we should be following the incident response plan. Hopefully you've done some tabletop exercises and practices along the way, but ultimately it's within your organization. A lot of times now the CISO is reporting directly up to the board. I know that's been occurring recently. So you want to have the CISO responsible for the cybersecurity. You want to have the IT group responsible for running the organization. It seems to work better that way because, again, I mentioned earlier, IT professionals are trained to operate environments and systems, and CISOs are trained to protect those environments and systems and then investigate when it occurs and, again, bring in the forensic professionals. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Steve.
I mean, I could just answer real quick from experience that generally I see it as a team effort in our incident response cases. The CIO generally takes control of the remediation and recovery process, and the CISO is generally responsible for the actual policy and governance and putting the controls in place in the first place. But it's generally the CIO and the infrastructure team that has to bring things back up and running, and they have to work with the cybersecurity team to get the answers to questions that they have. So I usually see it as a group effort.
Yep, thank you. The next question, should we have cyber insurance, and how do we determine the appropriate level of coverage? Try to address that one too, and I think we've touched on it a little bit. Cyber insurance is no different than any other insurance, right? And as an organization, you need to do a risk assessment understand where your risk is within your organization and your culture, and what risk you're trying to supplement by insurance. Given the nature of ransomware and malware and things are going to occur, I would recommend that all organizations evaluate and determine, if cyber insurance is appropriate, and then also making sure you're getting the correct policy. About 3 years ago, I actually assisted with a ransomware matter for a cardboard box manufacturer, and they're out of business for about 3 weeks, but they were really proud that they had a cyber insurance policy. But their policy specifically didn't exclude ransomware, but it did cover PCI, which was really fortunate, but they didn't have any credit cards. They didn't accept credit cards. So it's very important for you to work with your chief risk officer, work with your broker, work with your carrier to ensure your policy is covering the risk that you're trying to have it cover. Anything to add there, Steve?
Nope, I think that's good.
Here's one for you, Steve. I'll give you this one. Are there emerging national state bad actors that are serious threats to areas of IP? In these cases, the risk is that your IP will be used competitively against you. It is not really ransomware, but can lead to a corporate demise, much like Chinese exfiltration of Nortel's research portfolio contributed to their risk of bankruptcy. So,
yeah, I could take that one too.
Okay.
I mean, we run into, as a manufacturer, as a software development company, we've seen this happen over the years to not just to Nortel, but if you guys remember a while back, the RSA breach was a real challenge, and a lot of people thought that would maybe be the end of RSA, but as it turns out, that was not the case. This is a big risk now, and this does happen, and we've actually put a lot of controls in to further separate our risks of our IP from our operational platform. So I think companies are very concerned about this, and you're right, it could be not only used competitively, but could also be used, against clients if you're not careful. So this is definitely a risk, and I think all solid companies that are in the security space and in the IP space are focused on it. We have a team just dedicated to it.
Yeah, and I think, that allows prevention tools and other ways to lock down your environment to ensure your IP isn't locking out the door. I see work on a number of cyber due diligence projects where we're helping our clients evaluate new purchases or new acquisitions, and when it becomes to a software company, you really, really need to do some threat intelligence work. Look out there to see if there's any chatter about the company. Look out there to see if their IP is already for sale online or has already been for sale. You can imagine, some of these startup companies where, it's 100 employees, and the top 10 guys are going to walk away with, $50 million each, and the other 90 are going to be unemployed. When the deal goes through, they may have an incentive to kind of take some of that IP. We also had an incident where we actually helped a client with their acquisition and found out that actually the chief operating officer who had founded the company had downloaded all the source code and everything else and thought he could still keep it and, start his new company. And we found that information, and it wasn't a non-lucrative thing. The individual was set to get $175 million for selling his company, and once we confronted him with that, he handed the source code over pretty quickly. So that's an important area to think about. The threat intelligence and threat monitoring there's services out there, and your company, if you're a very IT sensitive company, you may want to invest in one of those types of services to do that monitoring for you. Got time for one more question here, I think. And I apologize, we've gotten a number of questions, and as we said, we'll follow up with some answers for you by email on those questions. But the last question we'll be able to take is, we work with a significant number of third-party vendors. How would we even begin to measure their cybersecurity and overall effect on our cybersecurity? That's an important question, right? Because I don't have the exact data in front of me, but significant number of investigations that we work on resulted from a breach of a third party vendor. One thing in how things are improving here in this area, it's just not a simple questionnaire anymore. When you're signing up a third party vendor, how well you do, or do you do this or do you do that? There's actually a lot of third party services. KPMG actually offers services where we assist our clients, some of the largest companies in the world who have tens of thousands of vendors, and we do a risk-based approach of those vendors and do a deeper dive. We do actual audits of some of those on a periodic basis, but it's more than just a questionnaire. It's actually diving in. So, Steve, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I do know KPMG has a great third-party risk survey that they do, which is probably a good place to start people to look into. And there's also a few conferences around that have now emerged just focused on third-party risk. If you search, third-party risk conference, there's some good virtual events that will help you with that.
Great. Again, we'd like to wrap up. Thank all of you for participating. Thank you for your questions. As we said, we will follow up with some answers for those of you who we didn't get to. Steve, my contact information is here, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have. We do have some additional documentation I know that the organizers will be able to share with you about KPMG and BlackBerry. So we look forward to following up and answering any questions or anything that may come up. Steve, anything to wrap up?
Nope, thanks. We appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That's Jim Arnold and Steve Struthers. Really appreciate everybody taking the time today. And as our speakers mentioned, if you would like to learn more about KPMG and BlackBerry or download a copy of today's slides, you'll find that under the related resources links. And if you'd like to refer a colleague or actually review the material yourself, this presentation will be available on demand within about 48 hours from now. And otherwise, I'll thank everybody again for taking their time and participating so actively today. My name is Michael Steinhardt for Viacom CBS Digital, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, Michael.